fire burned not only a house, but also the lie that sustained the Dupree family. The flames clawed at the walls like a ferocious beast, devouring a legacy that had once symbolized perfection, while inside, the ghosts of unspoken words and hidden betrayals screamed louder than any siren. The mansion that had been a symbol of Anita's pride, her empire of control and discipline, collapsed under the weight of smoke and silence. When the last flames died down, the name Dupree was ash in the mouths of the public. Investigators moved through the rubble like vultures among the dead, and the smell of gasoline told them what no one dared to say: the fire was no accident. Then came the discovery, the remains of a gold necklace buried under the rubble, engraved with Vanessa's name. That single clue shattered whatever peace remained, turning grief into doubt, and doubt into a weapon. Naomi had disappeared hours before the explosion, her disappearance transforming her from victim to monster in a matter of hours. Her name was plastered across the headlines, her picture pasted next to words like arson, revenge, and fall of a dynasty. Anita stood before the camera, calm but trembling, rehearsing her denial while her mind replayed every warning sign she had missed. She had raised her child to win, to command, never to bend the knee, and now that same hunger had turned inward, devouring everything she loved. Vanessa sat silently, her hands gripping the edge of the vanity table, her reflection shattered by a crack in the mirror. She remembered taking off that necklace in Naomi's room the night they'd argued, leaving it on the dresser in a fit of rage. She'd left believing she was done with Naomi, done with the endless tension that had turned affection into resentment. Now, that carelessness was a curse that made her complicit in a crime she hadn't committed. The news replayed the scene of the charred building over and over again, and each time Vanessa saw her initials glimmering in the ashes. She felt something shatter inside her, a mix of guilt and fear and a little relief and shame that the world no longer compared her to Naomi. Somewhere beyond the flashing lights and police lines, a black car rolled through the gates, its tires crunching on the soot-slicked gravel. Inside, Naomi lay unconscious in the trunk, her wrists bruised, her body limp but still breathing. The man behind the wheel wore gloves, his face obscured by the flickering light of the dashboard, and when he stopped at the edge of the woods, he looked back at her as if examining evidence rather than a person. Naomi did not wake up when the car door slammed shut or when the woods swallowed her again. She drifted through fragments of memory, the heat of the argument with Vanessa, the echo of Anita's voice telling her she was a disappointment, the suffocating silence after she'd screamed that she was tired of being invisible. Every sound, every word became fuel for the fire in her dreams, and when she finally opened her eyes in a hospital bed a few days later, she no longer knew if she was victim or perpetrator. Anita came to visit her but couldn't touch her hand. Her eyes held pity. But also fear that this daughter, who had inherited her sharpness and stubbornness, might have destroyed everything out of a wounded pride. Naomi wanted to tell her the truth, but what truth? That she hadn't started the fire? That she had imagined it? That a part of her wanted it to happen just to prove that she existed outside Vanessa's shadow? Meanwhile, Vanessa's public image was crumbling. Her attempts at excuses only deepened the rift. She denied involvement, but her voice trembled, betraying the insecurity of someone who knew her hands weren't entirely clean. Not because she had started the fire, but because she had told herself that Naomi deserved to lose everything. That toxic desire now hung over her like smoke, tainting her every breath. The public turned against her, branding her arrogant, while the gossip at Fairmont Crest painted her as a woman willing to do anything to erase her sister's legacy. Anita tried to regain control, summoning lawyers, advisors, and media experts, but even power has its limits when the heart of a family is rotten. Behind her calm exterior, Anita was constantly gnawing at guilt. She was so focused on appearances that she failed to notice the growing rift between her daughters. She remembered the night she'd found Naomi crying alone, and instead of comforting her, she'd lectured her daughter about resilience. Now, the memory tasted sour. The Dupree mansion had been rebuilt once after the storm, this time, it would never rise again. And yet, something darker loomed beneath the ashes. When police examined the surveillance footage, they found figures moving through the house before the explosion, two figures, one smaller, one taller, both wearing gloves. But the angle was wrong, the tape incomplete, almost as if someone had tampered with the recordings. A few days later, a journalist received an anonymous USB drive containing the videos. Naomi and Vanessa arguing furiously, voices raised, gestures violent. The video was taken just hours before the fire. When the footage leaked, the public watched it with reverence like blood to water. Naomi became the demented prodigal son, Vanessa became the calculating manipulator, Anita became the uncontrollable patriarchal mother. But there was one person smiling in the shadows, the man in the glove. He watched Fairmont Crest burn itself to the ground in scandal, his plan playing out exactly as planned. He knew the fire was only the first step. He had been in their lives long before the fire, whispering in their weaknesses, using them against each other, turning love into resentment and loyalty into fear. Naomi began to recall fleeting moments, the smell of perfume in the hallway, the gloved hand offering her a drink, the sudden dizziness before everything went black. She realized she hadn't escaped the mansion, she had been kidnapped. The truth stabbed at her like a knife, someone wanted her away long enough for the fire to burn and the guilt to be laid on her head. When she told Anita, her mother didn't know what to believe. The world had already chosen its story. And Vanessa, torn between guilt and disbelief, shunned Naomi completely, afraid that looking at her sister might make her see her own reflection in the rubble. Anita tried to salvage their reputation with a televised statement, her voice soft but hollow, promising full cooperation with the authorities. But even as she spoke, her eyes betrayed something deeper, a silent acknowledgement that the Dupree empire had always been built on fear, and that fear had finally come to collect. Meanwhile, Vanessa spiraled. Alone in her apartment, she watched the news footage wordlessly, unable to take her eyes off the image of her family home burning. She tried to convince herself that she wasn't to blame, that she just wanted justice, recognition, a space where she wouldn't be compared to Naomi's perfection. But jealousy had a way of reshaping memories, soon she couldn't tell whether her resentment was merely emotional or something darker, something complicit. When she closed her eyes, she saw Naomi's face in the flames, not screaming, not angry, just staring, frustrated, as if silently asking, "Are you happy now?" Outside, the press had been camped out for days, waiting for the next scandal, the next confession. The Dupree compound was both a crime scene and a stage, where every glance and silence was dissected by the world. And yet, in the background, that black car appeared again, parked near Dupree's old house at night, headlights off, waiting. The man in the gloves hadn't stopped. He had something else, another file, another secret. In one clip, Anita was seen arguing with a man in her office a few months before the fire, discussing insurance policies, debts, and the possible collapse of the family foundation. If that recording were exposed, it would destroy her completely. Naomi sensed it before anyone else, that the fire wasn't just about revenge or jealousy, but about wiping out the Dupree name altogether. As she left the hospital, she stood before the charred gate, breathing in the faint smell of soot that still lingered in the air. Behind her, the camera clicked, in front, the ruins whispered. She knew that if she didn't uncover the truth, the world would rewrite her life. And deep down, she suspected that Vanessa, however broken and scared, might still be holding onto some of that truth, whether out of guilt or self-preservation. Somewhere, Anita knelt before the family portrait, the burned faces, the shattered glass, and realized that the greatest tragedy was not the fire but the years of silence that led to it. Because in the end, the Dupree family wasn't destroyed by an outsider, it was destroyed by its own reflection. The night before the Dupree ruins were officially destroyed, Naomi returned alone. The air was heavy with ash and damp earth, the ghosts of all that had once been sacred. She stood where the grand staircase had stood, staring into the empty space where the fire had begun, and for the first time, she was no longer afraid. Every lie, every betrayal, every pain had led her to this exact point. She realized that the mansion had not been destroyed, it had been cleansed. What remained was not weakness, but clarity. Somewhere out there, the man in the glove still watched, waiting for her to make a mistake, but Naomi no longer felt like a victim in his game. She knew that to defeat someone who lived in the shadows, she would have to